is the new film directed by Steven Spielberg, written by Zach Penn and Ernest Cline, and based on the titular novel by Ernest Cline that was released in 2011. It stars Tye Sheridan, Olivia Cooke, Ben Mendelsohn, Simon Pegg, T.J. Miller, Mark Rylance, and many, many, many other actors. The year is 2045 in Columbus, Ohio, and the world has kind of gone to shit. Our main character, Tye Sheridan, called Wade Watts in the movie, lives in these kind of slums that are called the stacks, which are these stacks of trailers that are up on top of each other. And everybody in this future is spending most of their time in this virtual reality world that is called the Oasis, which is like both a VR world, a video game. It's sort of everything. It encompasses everything and every piece of media that's ever been built up to then in this singular world. And it is the biggest thing on the planet in this particular world. The creator of this virtual world, Halliday, played by Mark Rylance, is sort of this nerd superstar, this geek god, and he dies in 2040. Upon his death, he reveals that he has left a couple Easter eggs within the game, 3 keys, and if you find the 3 keys and have all the clues, you can basically gain control of his product, of the Oasis, and of this world. So on the one side, you've got just regular normal people that are hunting down these Easter eggs, like our main character, Watts. And on the other side, an evil megacorporation, IOI, led by Ben Mendelsohn, that is also trying to gain control of this game because it's like a huge thing that everybody plays. And IOI basically has an army out there trying to gain control of the Oasis so they can monetize it to death and become the biggest corporation in the world. And so the film's been out for a while now, and with most of the reactions that I've seen, whether they be positive or negative, everybody seems to be on the same boat as to what this film is, and everybody seems to be taking this film at face value. As this sort of celebration of nostalgia and pop culture. And basically, whether or not you like the film depends on how much you can stomach references being shoved in your face. And I have to say, I was taken aback by the fact that not many people seem to pick up on the satire and the pessimism that just runs throughout the film. And I thought, this is great. I've got some sort of unique perspective. This is going to make a good video. And unfortunately, as always, you do a little digging and you find out that you're not that special, because I did find an article written by David Ehrlich for IndieWire that I think articulates a lot of my feelings on the film. So I'm going to put that in the description, and I'm going to use it in some spots. I'm going to quote it to sort of augment my review of the film, because I really think people should read it. It's one of the better pieces I've read on Ready Player One, and it's titled, I have it written down right here, to give you an idea, Steven Spielberg invented the modern blockbuster, but Ready Player One suggests he might regret it. Ready Player One is a film made by an older man, an older director, who is very concerned about his legacy, about his filmography, about his imprint on the world and what he's left behind. It's very difficult for me not to perceive Mark Rylance's character, Halliday, as anything but a surrogate of Steven Spielberg himself. What he's left behind is both beautiful in how many people it has touched and affected and how universal it is, but at the same time, it is this sort of strange monoculture responsible for a sort of single-minded hive mind mentality where nothing else exists, nothing else is being created. There are no other video games in this world apart from the Oasis. It seems very strange that a company with as many resources as IOI isn't just creating a competitor to the Oasis. And even within the Oasis, it seems that creation has stagnated. There are no sort of references beyond, obviously you can't catch them all within a single viewing or within a billion viewings, I think. But, you see a Master Chief in there, you see elements from, the early to mid-2000s, but there has clearly been a cutoff point for creation where beyond a certain date, we're just memorializing everything that we've loved before and not creating anything new. And on that point, I'm going to quote Ehrlich's article because I think that it illustrates what I'm saying very well. There is no creation in the Oasis, only recognition. No love, only obsession. It is as if the entire universe has been subsumed into the post-credits stinger from the end of a Marvel movie. Spectacle used to be about creating something new, but now everyone is just holding their breath for a glimpse of something they've seen before. In that sense, Ready Player One is a painfully lucid exploration of our current blockbuster culture. Now, a lot of people would argue that nostalgia is nothing new, it's always existed, and that's a fair point. Steven Spielberg's filmography is littered with references to other films and other filmmakers. Spielberg is part of that sort of first generation that really grew up on cinema, that generation of filmmakers that were cinephiles and students of film as much as they were directors. And they would really spend a lot of time watching movies and watching, films by these same directors, trying to study how their filmography made sense within the auteur theory, and how all their scenes would break down and how they would function. But the way that the Spielbergs and the De Palmas and the Scorseses and all these directors would reference previous works seems to not be on the same level as the way nostalgia is functioning today. So when Spielberg uses the vertigo dolly shot in Jaws, for example, he's not just indicating that he really likes Alfred Hitchcock, he's showing that he understands Hitchcock's technique and his use of this technique within the movie, what that evokes, what that transmits emotionally to the spectator, and he's reusing that to evoke the same feeling. In Ready Player One, none of the characters seem to actually like or enjoy any of the films or books or video games that they're referencing. What seems to matter is that they know they exist. The reference is important in itself, not exactly what it's evoking. Nobody actually takes the time to explain why they love something, what impact it had on them, what it evokes, what emotional reaction they have when they talk about GoldenEye or whatever it is they're referencing. They are just content in reciting these Wikipedia-style facts. The actual piece of media, the actual piece of art is less important than the knowledge of its existence, and at a certain point it seems like it doesn't really matter if they've seen the movie or not, if they've read the book or not. What matters is that they can get the references and participate in this sort of geek community that fills this empty void that exists within their lives. As far as movies go, it seems that cinephilia is dead, and we've moved on to something very different. I guess you could call it a cinephage generation, where we devour media constantly. We have access to all of the films and all of the media in the world thanks to the internet, thanks to streaming services, thanks to DVDs and Blu-rays, and we're constantly consuming and devouring media and film and books and video games, but it doesn't seem that we're actually understanding and taking the time to actually digest what we just watched. It's about the act of watching it. It's about sort of this collector's mentality of keeping tabs on everything you've watched, and I'm on Letterboxd, I'm guilty of this as well, of course. Or just look at how many YouTube channels you have of people buying Blu-rays and showing off their collection and making videos about what they purchased. And that's not me trying to criticize them at all, it's just that in terms of our relationship to cinema and to media, it has profoundly changed from Spielberg's generation to ours, and I think that we are, our generation, more and more surrounded by images, and yet somehow we're less and less equipped to actually read them and actually understand them. And again, going back to Ehrlich's article, meanwhile, when Wade's friend Waithe builds the Iron Giant into a killing machine, it suggests that she didn't really internalize the pacifist message of Brad Bird's animated classic. In a world where people only can communicate through the limited vocabulary of stunted cultures, a few details are bound to get lost in translation. The film leaves us with a confrontation between essentially two groups. One is a group of vapid fanboys, and we've talked about that a little bit previously, and on the other side, an evil corporation that's trying to monetize your childhood. And this really is where a lot of the satirical elements became very evident for me. Ben Mendelsohn is fantastic as this evil corporate overlord. He is full-on 80s evil businessman, and he is just a joy to watch. And I don't know if these get actually referenced within the film. It would be funny if they didn't, because the two films that Ben Mendelsohn's evil character and his evil corporation sort of reminded me of the most are both RoboCop and Gremlins 2, which are just giant satires in their own right. And unfortunately, Spielberg lacks the bite or the cynicism of a Paul Verhoeven, which is also why we love him, because he's both this critical darling, but also very populist, very universal filmmaker, which, that makes him a great filmmaker in his own right. And I do think that Spielberg was the only one who could have made this film and should have made this film. But I really wish that maybe he had gone a little stronger on the satire and on the RoboCop Verhoeven front. I really viewed the film coming out of it as a Steven Spielberg Starship Troopers. Now, for those of you who don't know, Starship Troopers was based on a book by Robert A. Heinlein that was written in the 50s, and it was extremely patriotic, extremely pro-US military, anti-communist, and very right-wing. The 1997 film, on the other hand, that was written by Edward Neumeier, writer of RoboCop, and directed by Paul Verhoeven, pushes those elements so far that it becomes a satire of its own source material and goes against, on a political sense and on an ideological scale, it goes against everything that the book was drawing from. And this is really what I felt Spielberg was trying to do. I mean, how else do you explain that in the Oasis, everything is just so ugly? Not from a technical standpoint, it's remarkable in terms of what it achieves technically, but on an aesthetic level, it's this mishmash of different references that really don't fit together, and it just creates this very ugly world, and both by design and also because it couldn't be otherwise. I mean, there's no singular vision. It's all these different things just shoved together. It couldn't have any sort of coherent aesthetic look to it. And so it ends up being this Frankenstein's monster of popular culture that is quite hideous. And meanwhile, even though reality is supposed to be a shithole, where we've let these evil corporations take over the world and most people are living in slums, the actual set design and the cinematography and the world that they've created is quite beautiful and far superior aesthetically to this supposed virtual paradise that people are flocking to. And on that same front, you have Olivia Cooke, who plays Artemis, who in the real world is this beautiful young woman. She just happens to have a birthmark across her face and is convinced herself that she's ugly. And meanwhile, in the Oasis, in the virtual world, her avatar is this gross, hideous, anime, bug-eyed, disgusting creature. And yet that is the character she chooses to portray herself as. And that is her supposedly beautiful character that Wade Watts falls in love with within the Oasis. So again, you have this sort of split between what's supposedly beautiful in this virtual paradise that is in reality absolutely gross and hideous, and the real world, which is far more beautiful and far more engaging. I just couldn't help but feel that, much like Verhoeven with Starship Troopers, Spielberg was shitting on this geek mecca that was created by Ernest Cline within the book. He's name-checked a lot in the book, and he's removed a lot of those references. He feels almost embarrassed by this godlike creator status that Cline and people of his generation, people of my generation have, given him, when he just sort of views himself as this little nerd kid playing in his room that, is this socially awkward guy that created these worlds just because he felt lonely. He seems to be telling us that it's time to stop sacralizing him, that it's time to stop living in these beautiful memories that we have in these worlds that he's created, and it may be time to live in the real world, but also to create something new, to keep moving forward. I feel the screenplay is bland at best, some of the dialogue is particularly atrocious, and yeah, I was more fascinated by the film than I was enthralled by it, unfortunately, and so it really falls within that middle tier sort of Spielberg for me. And there you have it. For everybody who liked the video, please hit the like button, that's always helpful, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so, that's always a great thing. So yeah, thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.